From the News Channel 5 network, this is Urban Outlook.
Hello and welcome to Urban Outlook. I'm April Eaton. Thank you so much for being with us today. You know, schools across Tennessee and throughout the nation are racing to try to figure out what to do with students who could be going back to school as soon as August and some in September. Bring kids back to school with in-classroom learning, of course following CDC guidelines, or keep them at home where it's likely safer and healthier, but kids will have to learn online. The decision has teachers in some states voicing their opinions and also protesting about health concerns. But there's another concern surfacing. Some say this COVID-19 pandemic may lead to students of color getting left behind. To talk to us about this topic is Dr. Gilman Whiting. He is an associate professor of African American and Diaspora Studies, director of the Scholar Identity Institute, and director of graduate studies at Vanderbilt University. Welcome to the show, Dr. Whiting.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. As I said, you know, this pandemic has taken us for a turn, put us all, some would say, caught us all off guard as we continue to see the results. But many communities are grappling with this whole question about whether or not students should go back to school so that they can continue their learning. There's a huge health chunk of that question, of course, but you're here to talk about a possible other concern when we talk about whether kids stay at home and learn, go back to school and learn. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I must say that, and I'm going to share a screen of technology. We all know where we are today, so we're going to deal with a little bit of technological stuff here. So I'm showing a screen now, and what I'm discussing today, what we're discussing is the impact, if any, of this pandemic on the digital or virtual divide that exists, the impact, the implication, and ways to lessen their effects. So the amount of evidence that is documented looking at the disparities between Black or African American born in America and whites and Asians not born in America, and whites and Blacks compared with Hispanic and Latinx populations is overwhelmingly clear. What we're seeing is that we have already in our existence a virtual gap. The gap that we see between test scores, the gap that we see between health benefits, all of those things are coming to a head right now. We're looking at gaps in races that have been evident for decades. In 2000, for example, 50% of whites had access to internet compared to less than 40% of Hispanic and less than 35% of African Americans. So what we're looking at now is more of that. And as of 2009, 10 years later, that number was up to 77% for whites. So for Asians, so it is climbing in terms of our usage of the internet, but whites moved up to 68, but Blacks still and Hispanics still didn't reach the 50% mark in terms of having access to computers at home. So without having computers at home and also access to the internet, what we're finding is the gap widening. We can look around and see information from news slides that are coming out. Nearly 1 in 5 teens can't always finish their homework because of digital divide. The digital divide persists amongst lower income Americans. Even though they gain technology adoption, we're still seeing the numbers do that. Broadband access. We're working with schools and school teachers around the city to try to figure out how to get computers into the hands of kids. And then even if they get to computers, they don't have the information that they need. So schools closed during coronavirus, where we have this gap, we call a summer slide oftentimes. Those things are continuing. And I fear that if we don't do something about these things here with some due quickness, we're going to have a lot more problems than we have right now.
Yeah, some school systems, I know you know, have been struggling to try to outfit their students with technology at home. But then there's still the connectivity concerns if parents don't already have access to Wi-Fi in the home. So how do we really try to get these young people ready to learn if it turns out the choice is to learn online?
Well, I think there's several things that can be done. First, we have to make sure that we have equal access to the internet and what's available. A lot of the kids, I'm working with a program right now in East Nashville, Why We Can't Wait. And the director over there, Daryl Caldwell, we have kids. I have in another room, I actually have another computer on that has about 20 kids in the virtual environment with an ELA teacher, a science teacher from Tennessee State University, as well as a math coach. And every day for the last month and a half, we've been meeting with them for a couple hours in the morning to try to get them up. Now, one of the tasks that we had to deal with, and principals around the country and teachers around the country have had to deal with, is getting computers into the homes of the students and then making sure they have access. Even though our usage of telephones are going up in the Black and brown communities, broadband access inside the community, inside the homes, is at a minimal. So how then do we get the technology first in there, get them hooked up into something, and then also get the quality instruction that they will need? The gap continues to grow. And I fear, we already always talked about this thing called the summer slide, where students of color, unfortunately, during the summertime, because of poor schooling in the beginning, fall further behind in the summer. So now we have this starting way back in January, February. So we've lost half of that year. We're losing the summer, and we're looking at possibly losing the fall, if not the spring. So I feel the effects of this, we can't measure them now, but I feel the effects of this will be phenomenal in about 3 or 4 years. This generation of kids will have a whole different access to the knowledge and lack thereof.
And I know you say you can't really define the effects of what this will mean on our students, but you know the history, right? So the disparities that have always often existed between our kids of color and white students, the disadvantages that they have faced through the years with the haves and the have-nots, school systems that were wealthier being able to provide for their students, sometimes those inner city neighborhood schools not having the same opportunities. So as you look at sort of the history of the disparities that have existed in the school system, even prior to this pandemic, and then add on top of that what's going on now with this digital divide and the disparity there with having online access to learning, what could be the problems that we see moving forward?
Well, I think there's a disengagement already with school, with children. And I think the longer they stay out, the transition back into the environment, into the school environment, can have an impact on the teachers, on the community, on the environment. What I think also can happen is that students decide that this is their option. We're not just dealing with the coronavirus. We're dealing with pretty much a race pandemic, as well as a political pandemic. So it's almost a tridemic going on. And kids are starting to spend more time protesting or on TikTok than they are learning right now. And that is something that will have an effect long into the school year. Kids being disengaged already academically, and now we're going to see the impact possibly in the future. So I feel that unless we can work with parents and teachers and communities and families all together, bringing these interesting times into one to work towards the future, I think we're going to have some severe problems down the road with how kids will actually re-enter school.
Dr. Whiting, the McKinsey Group, I don't know if you saw some of their recent research kind of along these same lines. They talked about that the COVID-19 pandemic the U.S. education system, rather, was never built to deal with extended shutdowns like this, like the COVID-19 pandemic. And they talked about the fact that not only do these disparities between white students and Black and Hispanic students exist, but that it could lead to dropout rates down the road. If kids can't ever catch up and do that work, it could lead to us having fewer Black students able to go into the workforce later on, because the learning will end is sort of, what this suggests. What do you say to that?
I say that this is exactly what I'm referring to. The research I put up earlier was from the Pew report, or Pew Center, as well as that report. And both of them have the same kind of diagnosis that I have. And that is that research has shown for a while that a student who is kept back 1 year is almost 50% as likely to drop out. Now, considering that we already have a 50% dropout rate already amongst a lot of Black and brown students, add that to the mix if you can. So statistically, it becomes crazy. And if you are kept back 2 years, you're almost guaranteed to stop out, drop out, or psychologically disengage from the academic environment. So we already have teachers who are trying their best to meet the needs of students, and they come from sometimes woefully underprepared graduate programs. And now we have students who are going to come back to schools who have to make up and catch up to where they were before, and they were already behind. Research showed at one time that the average graduating African-American male at 17 or 18 years old has the reading and math ability of a 14-year-old European-American or white child. That gap is only going to grow. And I said the political climate brings about a new kind of activism within students too, where the school system almost seems part of the system. So there's also that psychological disengagement that goes along. So again, we can only speculate as to what happens, but we have seen this before. As you mentioned, this is not new. This is just a piling on, if you will.
The school system being part of the system that's keeping them behind, I think is what you mean there, right? Wow.
Yes. If I said anything different, that's exactly what I mean.
Wow.
We spend, if you think about it, kids spend 13 years in the school system from K through 12. And as they spend more time in the school system, they spend more time there. So we definitely have to have that relationship with the teachers that are there. So if this relationship stays extended the way it is right now, we have to reestablish that same kind of relationship that gets the students moving forward. Hopefully, this will disappear, and then students will jump right back in and push forward and say, okay, I'm back in school. I want to do more. I need to do more. But the probability of that is highly unlikely.
Dr. Whiting, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk more about what your study is finding, but also perhaps some solutions, some things that parents can do now to change this around if they can. We'll be right back after this. Stay with us.